All right, it looks like we have all of our panelists here and we're building up our attendee number. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We are recording this today, so folks come in late, they can catch the beginning in our recording. It's going to be shared on our website later. So hello and welcome everyone to the informational webinar for the 2022 Delta Science Fellows Program Request for Applications. Today's webinar is hosted by California Sea Grant and the Delta Science Program. You can enable live transcription using a control button on your Zoom screen if you would like to do so. Just going to confirm the slides are changing for everybody. Great, wonderful. Okay, so please note that the information in this presentation is accurate as of today, February 7th. However, the timeline and details of this request for applications are subject to change. Any updates to our timeline or the language in the RFA will be listed on the Sea Grant website, which Nick just shared with you all in the chat. So if you are the type of person who likes to download a PDF of our webpage RFA for reference, we encourage you to make sure you keep checking back to our webpage in case we have made any changes, and you should not rely solely on the information in this presentation or in any downloaded PDF without referring to our webpage. So we're going to do a round of introductions for the points of contact who are involved with the 2022 Delta Science Fellowship. So all of the folks who we're going to introduce today, please turn on your cameras. And if you can just give a wave when I introduce you, that would be excellent. So I will start off with myself as the representative for California Sea Grant. My name is Leon Gua, and I'm the research coordinator for California Sea Grant. You can reach me at the email that's shown on the screen, sgproposal@ucsd.edu. Two folks who are not on the call today, but are really important for the budget and fiscal related parts of this fellowship are Rose Madsen, our assistant director, and Larry Woolfolk, who is one of our fiscal officers. From the Delta Science Program and Delta Stewardship Council, we have Lauren Hastings, who is the lead program manager at the Delta Science Program for this request for applications. And she's also the primary contact for questions about community mentors. Laurel Larson is not here today. She had a conflict with this webinar, but she's the Delta lead scientist for the Delta Science Program and is spreading the word through her presentations at various venues like the Delta Stewardship Council Meetings. Luis Conrad is here and is the Deputy Executive Officer for Science and a former fellow community mentor. Rachel Klopfenstein is the Senior Environmental Scientist and lead for the Science Action Agenda, which we'll be talking about more later today. So we're here to give you an overview of this fellowship opportunity and answer any questions that you may have. So today's objectives are to describe the purposes and management needs for the Delta Science Fellowship Program, review important application components, including the new components of the 2022 RFA, and to provide application tips and answer questions that potential applicants may have. Our webinar is broken roughly into these sections, and we're also going to have a few Q&A opportunities interspersed in these sections. So a couple of guidelines that we're going to ask attendees to follow. For the purposes of this webinar, please ask questions using the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The chat is currently only enabled for speaking directly with the hosts and panelists. So please only use that if you're having some technical issues or some things going on with the speakers, making it hard to listen. So feel free to post questions in that Q&A function during the presentation or during our Q&A opportunities. And you can also ask anonymous questions using the Q&A function. Please reserve very specific questions that are relevant for only your project via email to either myself or to Lauren Hastings. And we are, again, recording this presentation, and a PDF of the slides will be made available, so you don't have to feel like you need to scramble to take notes. Hopefully, we'll provide plenty of resources for you to refer back to after this. So I'm going to start with an overview of the partner programs and the Delta Science Fellowship Program. So as I mentioned earlier, I work for California Sea Grant, which is an organization built from a federal state partnership and is authorized by the National Sea Grant College and Program Act of 1966. There are 34 programs in the Sea Grant network, which they are pretty much in every state that borders oceans or the Great Lakes. Our mission is to provide integrated research, extension, outreach, and education to help Californians balance diverse interests that intersect with the coastal and marine environments and adapt to changing conditions and needs. So participating in the Delta Science Fellowship opportunity helps us fulfill that mission by providing training opportunities to students and early career professionals like yourselves, while conducting research that will address the management needs of the Delta region. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lauren Hastings to talk about the Delta Stewardship Council and introduce the Delta Science Fellowship.
Great, thanks, Leanne. So the Delta Stewardship Council is an independent state agency that was created by the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Reform Act of 2009, that we call the Delta Reform Act for short. The council was created to develop a comprehensive long-term legally enforceable plan called the Delta Plan to guide how multiple federal, state, and local agencies manage the Delta's water and environmental resources. The 2009 legislation also directed the council to provide coordination for implementing the Delta Plan, as well as oversight of state and local agencies proposing to carry out, fund, or approve Delta-related actions. The Delta Reform Act also instructed the council to base their work on best available science. The mission of the Delta Stewardship Council is to advance the state's co-equal goals for the Delta, which means the achievement of a more reliable statewide water supply and a healthy and protected ecosystem, both in a manner that protects and enhances the unique characteristics of the Delta as an evolving place. Next slide. Also, as part of the Delta Reform Act, the existing CalFed science program was moved to the Delta Stewardship Council, and it has the mission of providing the best possible scientific information for water and environmental decision-making in the Bay Delta system. That mission shall be carried out through funding research, synthesizing and communicating scientific information to policymakers and decision makers, promoting independent scientific peer review, and coordinating with Delta agencies to promote science-based adaptive management. So one of the things we're talking about here is funding science through the Fellows Program. One of the first responsibilities given to the Delta Science Program in the first Delta Plan was to develop a Delta Science Plan. This is a shared guidance document intended to strengthen, organize, and communicate science to provide relevant, credible, and legitimate decision support for policy and management actions. The Delta Science Plan proposes ways to conduct science in an open and transparent manner that supports the concept of one Delta, one science, which is an open Delta science community that works collaboratively to build a shared body of scientific knowledge to inform future water and environmental decisions. Next slide. So the Delta Science Fellowship Program is the continuation of the successful CalFed Science Fellowship Program that was started back in 2003. We are now recruiting for the 13th cohort of Delta Science Fellows. The purpose of this program is to train the next generation of science leaders in the Delta by bringing together fellows with research mentors and community mentors in collaborative research, data analysis, and synthesis projects relevant to Delta policy and management. The fellowships provide up to 2 years of support, including a monthly stipend and research and educational expenses for biophysical and social science projects for postdocs and graduate students at the PhD and master's level. Next slide. So the goals of our Delta Science Fellowship Program are to engage highly qualified scientific talent to help advance the state of knowledge in social and biophysical science on high priority management needs and science actions identified by the Science Action Agenda, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. In addition, one of the goals is to provide support for the training and development of social and biophysical scientists to work on research projects that support resource management in the Delta and contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in Delta science. And finally, to promote scientific partnerships across research institutions, agencies, nonprofit organizations, Delta communities, and multiple disciplines. Next slide. So the priorities for this year's Delta Science Fellowship applications are taken from the draft 2022 through 2026 Science Action Agenda, which we also call the SAA. The SAA is a 4-year multidisciplinary science action for the Delta that prioritizes and aligns science actions to respond to relevant management needs. This current version of the SAA is currently being updated and is well on its way to being finalized. It was developed through an open and collaborative process involving numerous state, federal, and local agencies, along with representatives from nonprofit organizations, local communities, and universities, and non-governmental organizations in 2020 and 2021. The current draft of the SAA includes 25 priority science actions that address 6 management needs. This slide shows the 6 management needs, and please refer to the full draft SAA appendix for the current list of the 25 science actions. It's expected that the SAA will be finalized later this month. While the phrasing of some priorities may change, we do not anticipate any major revisions to the top 25 science actions and the 6 management needs. So I wasn't planning to read all of these 6 priority management needs. They're listed there, and they're listed in the request for applications. So I will hand it back to Leanne.
Thanks, Lauren. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about eligibility, who is eligible to apply for this fellowship opportunity. For the postdoctoral fellowship, applicants must have completed a PhD in a field related to natural resources, environmental sciences, engineering, social sciences, or human dimensions, and be associated with an accredited U.S. institution of higher learning for the duration of the award. For the PhD master's track, applicants must be actively enrolled or recently been admitted to a PhD master's degree program in natural resources, environmental sciences, engineering, social sciences, or human dimensions, and remain associated with an accredited U.S. institution of higher learning for the duration of the award. For the full application, all applicants must identify and include letters of support from a research mentor and at least 1 community mentor. Proposed fellowship projects are not required to be physically located within the Delta. However, it is expected that project activities must provide a demonstrable benefit to the Delta and address the priority research topics that Lauren just discussed. So we'd also like to emphasize that California Sea Grant and the Delta Science Program are committed to building inclusive research, extension, communication, and education programs that serve people with unique knowledges, backgrounds, life experiences, needs, perspectives, and ways of thinking. So please do not underestimate how you can gain from and contribute to this fellowship program. If you are eligible, please consider applying. So in 2022, the Delta Science Program and partner organizations are expected to sponsor a total of approximately 6 to 8 fellows across multiple disciplinary areas. For the postdoctoral fellowship, an award can provide up to 2 years of support. Each year, up to $59,000 can be requested per year for stipend. And this cannot be spent as salaries, wages, or benefits, only for stipend. And then up to $34,000 can be requested for research and education supplies. So that can include supplies, equipment, travel, as well as health benefits. And please remember that when you're preparing your budgets, which we'll talk about a little more later, that there is a 30% indirect cost rate that will be charged on that research and education costs. For the PhD and master's fellowship, an award again can provide up to 2 years of support. The maximum that can be requested for stipend is $35,000. And then for the research and education supplies, a maximum of $23,000 can be requested. Awarded fellows are expected to complete a number of deliverables throughout their fellowship. Within 1 month after the funds are awarded, fellows must submit a formal mentoring plan that is developed with their research and community mentors. Traditionally, an early career leadership workshop has been hosted for the Delta Science Fellows, which provides professional development opportunities like learning about different career paths, science communication, and more. Due to COVID, it remains to be seen whether this workshop will be hosted, but if it's offered, fellows will be expected to participate. Fellows may also be asked to give presentations or briefings during Delta Stewardship Council meetings. Fellows are expected to present their findings at the Bay Delta Science Conference and or the State of the Estuary Conference, as well as at other professional meetings. And they are expected to publish their results from this fellowship in peer-reviewed open access journals. Finally, fellows must complete annual progress reports and a final completion report. All right, so we're going to take a pause here and open the floor for questions for California Sea Grant or the Delta Science Program to answer. And as a reminder, in the next section, we're going to be covering the application process and components in more detail. So if you have questions about that, you may want to wait until later on. So go ahead and use the Q&A function if you have a question for us at this time. And my colleague, Nick Sadrapour from California Sea Grant is going to help us speak out loud these questions as you submit them.
All right, so the first question is, can applicants outside of California apply for this grant?
The answer is yes, you can apply for this fellowship opportunity if you are based outside of California. Just remember that it does, your proposed work does need, again, to have demonstrable benefits to the Delta region. And anyone in part of the Delta group is feel free to add or answer the questions.
Should I read the question then? The question is, do you have recommendations for how to connect with a community mentor and who qualifies as a community mentor? So one of the things we're doing this year, because that can be challenging for applicants, so I'm providing more of a service for doing that. And there's 2 ways to connect with me if you need that help. Feel free to email me as soon as you feel you need that help. And also we've got, and Leanne, I think we'll talk about this more later, but we've got a notice of intent question where you can let us know that you need help identifying a community mentor. And I will reach out to you and ask for more details of your project. And I'm collecting now a list of folks that are interested in being community mentors along with their expertise. And I'll try to find an appropriate match for you. So community mentors are generally folks that have a pretty good working knowledge of the Delta. They often work for state, federal, local agencies in the Delta, or a non-governmental organization, or even a private firm, but they have a good working understanding and can help connect the fellow with on the ground work and what the priorities are for management.
All right, thanks, Lauren. The next question is about eligibility. So this applicant, if they're a first year's master's student, are they eligible for 2 years funding if they maintain affiliation with their university after graduation?
So that one, my understanding of affiliation would mean that you still need to be a student for the duration of the fellowship. But I am not confident on that. Does anyone else have an answer to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, that's my understanding, is that they would still need to be a master's student for the 2 years.
Yeah, so you can also request only 1 year of funding support. So if you know you only want 1 year support, you definitely are going to be finishing within 1 year. You can request 1 year of support. You do not have to request 2. So, you don't need to delay your graduation just to apply to this opportunity.
All right, the next question we have is for a PhD or master's track. Is the 30% indirect cost in addition to the $75,000 cap, or is it included within the total budget?
Excuse me. So just to clarify, the stipend is not subject to the indirect costs, but the research and education funds are subject to the 30% indirect cost rate, and your request needs to include the cost, that 30%. So the absolute maximum that you're requesting needs to consider that 30% indirect cost rate. And if you need to, talk through that a little more, I encourage you to reach out to Rose Madsen at sgbudget@ucsd.edu. And I will be sharing that email again later on so that you can see it again. So Rose will be answering all of those budget related questions for us.
So I was just trying to type that answer in. The next question is, can a non-US citizens apply for the grant?
I believe we are not, that US citizens are, sorry, non-US citizens are not eligible for this opportunity. That was the last that I understood in talking with Delta, but have we heard anything differently about that point?
That's my understanding. We can look into that though, just to double check.
Okay. Well, if that changes, we'll say no for now. And if that changes, we will release an announcement of that.
Excellent. This next question is about the fourth point of the management needs. Build and integrate knowledge on social process and behavior of Delta communities and residents to support effective and equitable management.
Yeah, I'd like to pass that over to Rachel Klopfenstein, if you're available, Rachel. One of the things I can say is this year we are trying to emphasize social science more than we have in the past. And Rachel, are you on?
Yeah, sorry, can you say the question again? I can't find it actually in the.
Yeah, sorry, once you click done, it sort of moves it to the answered ones. Basically, I think there's some elaboration on that point of the management needs. So I don't know, either an example or kind of explaining how that need fits into the goals.
And it was for management need number 4.
Okay, yeah, now I can see in the answered ones. Yeah, so within management need 4, and this is a little bit further explained when we provide the full set of science actions that are in the complete science action agenda. So essentially there are 25 science priorities that are all included under each of these 6 management needs. So there are some more specifics on exactly what we're trying to get at in terms of those, each of the management needs. So for management need 4, this one is focused on some remaining gaps that we have regarding the human dimension and understanding Delta communities. So there's 3 associated science actions, and I'm a little hesitant to put them in the chat because the phrasing of them might change slightly. But there's one that's focused on co-production, and there's one that's focused on understanding perceptions and helping to better inform governance and connection with human communities. So it's kind of like a half answer, but I will refer to the actual science actions themselves, which do give a lot more specificity to each of these management needs for management need 4 as well as the other 5. Does that help at all? Hopefully it does.
Yeah, I think you spoke to it well enough. So we have one more question about mentors. Do you need 2 separate people for mentors if your institutional mentor is a community mentor?
My understanding is that the way we're looking at this is we would like there to be at least 2, one at your institution, your academic institution, and a community mentor. I would recommend, because I don't know the specific example, that you contact me, and I'll take a look at it if you feel that that person can cover both roles. But in general, we would like there to be two, at a minimum of 2 mentors.
Yeah, and I'll just build on your answer in that one of the strengths and focuses of this fellowship is to build those relationships across organizations. And I can only see it to be your benefit to consider incorporating a community mentor that's separate from your research mentor. And if you are struggling to do so, then that's the point of the notice of intent to submit form I'm going to cover very soon, and we can certainly help you, assist you in finding an appropriate community mentor. So I think, for multiple reasons, it's good to have separate people fulfill those roles. All right, so as Nick said, I don't think we have any other questions at this point, so it seems like a good time to transition to our next section. All right, so to align with the increased emphasis on social sciences in the science agenda management needs that Lauren just mentioned and Rachel just mentioned, the review process has changed for the 2022 Delta Science Fellowship. There will be separate review panels for reviewing biophysical science and social science applications. And note for this request for applications, we are using the term biophysical science to be inclusive of biological, chemical, and/or physical science. All application components and deadlines are going to be the same for the 2 tracks. It just will, depending on which track you prefer, you will then have the relevant review panelists actually examining your application, and those review panelists also will have the subject matter expertise that is relevant to the topics that you would actually cover in your application. So in your notice of intent to submit form, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide, that's where you'll actually indicate which of these 2 review panels are most appropriate to review your application. So this is new this year. The first step in the application process is to submit a notice of intent to submit form. This notice of intent, or NOI, we will say for short, is required in order to be able to submit a full application. Please note that this form is not evaluated, which means you're not going to be screened out or discouraged or encouraged to apply based on what you submit. Instead, this form really assists us in pairing applicants with community mentors and identifying the appropriate reviewers for your research area. So in the form, you will provide your name, contact information, tentative project title and description, excuse me, your review mentor name and affiliation, your community mentor names if they've been identified, and the review track that you would like to have your application reviewed by. So in this form, you also should identify if you need help in identifying a community mentor, and if so, make sure that you've provided enough information in your project description to help Lauren provide advice on finding a community mentor. So once we've received your request for help, Lauren is going to be in communication with you and a community mentor about and provide you enough time, and once you've heard of who could potentially be your community mentor, to prepare your application appropriately. The link for this notice of intent form can be found on our webpage that Nick shared earlier. And in total, the form is really short. It should take, less than 10 minutes to complete. And so if you're even considering applying for this opportunity, please submit one, because you will not be able to submit a full application if you do not submit one of these very quick, unevaluated forms. They are due on February 28th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So once you have submitted a notice of intent form, you will be given access to our EC grant application portal. That's where you will see instructions for and be able to submit a full application for the Delta Science Fellowship, which is due April 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. This table provides an overview of the components of the full application, which I'm going to go into more detail of on subsequent slides. The components of a full proposal include a signed title page, a project summary, a project narrative, which has 4 sections to it, the budget and budget justification, letters of support from your community and research mentors, 3 letters of academic recommendation, and then transcripts from your undergraduate and/or graduate institutions. On the title page, you will provide summary information about your project and budget, as well as include approval signatures from the applicant, mentor, or principal investigator, and the authorized institutional representative. So because you do need to get that signature from your sponsored projects office at your academic institution, please make sure that you're providing sufficient time for them to review and provide that signature once they've seen your proposal and budget. You'll also be asked to provide some information about animal subjects and recombinant DNA technology or research. Next is the project summary. So in this, you will provide brief descriptions of the objectives, methodology, and rationale related to the Delta science actions that we talked about earlier. This summary should be a concise description of the proposed research in a form that's useful for a variety of purposes, including being posted on websites or for outreach. And so we really recommend taking the time to make sure that your writing here is very clear, compelling, and engaging for your readers. The project summary is the most widely consulted description of your project, and so we recommend writing it last and taking great consideration in writing it. That summary does have a one-page limit. The first part of the project narrative, which is really the bulk of your application, is the proposed research statement. This has a 12-page limit, excluding references. The statement should address the following sections. It should have an introduction where you're discussing the question and problems being addressed, your goals and objectives. There should be an approach or a plan of work, essentially describing your methodology. Very important to make sure you are addressing are the benefits and broader impacts. So what are the anticipated benefits to the fellow mentors? What is the relevance to the Delta community, policy, or management of the Delta? And this should include discussion of how the project team and proposed work is going to advance diversity, equity, inclusion in Delta science, as well as achieve other beneficial, broader societally relevant impacts. You also should describe your anticipated outputs and products in year 1 and year 2, and then include a your cited literature at the end. And again, that does not count toward your 12-page limit for this section. The other 3 sections of the project narrative are shown here. So first is the management needs and science actions, which has a 1-page limit, in which you very explicitly need to explain which overarching management needs and specific science actions are most related to your project and how your proposed work will address them. We definitely encourage you to be very specific. And when we look at the evaluation criteria later on, you'll see why this is a very critical part of your application. There also is a personal statement. So this has a 2-page limit and asks you to describe your career plans and summarize experiences that have prepared you for this project, as well as describe how interactions with your mentors is going to benefit your professional development. Finally, we are requesting CVs, curriculum vitae, for the applicant, the research mentors, and the community mentors, and these do each have a 2-page limit. As part of the full application, applicants do need to provide a budget and budget justification. When you're provided access to eSeaGrant, our application portal, you will have access to a budget workbook where you can plan your budget with your mentor and academic institution. However, all final budget submissions and justification must be done using the built-in budget worksheets on eSeaGrant. So please carefully review the budget instructions in the RFA and eSeaGrant, including those annual budget limits, the 30% indirect cost rate on research-related costs and benefits, and additionally provide enough justification for all of the budget items so that the reviewers can evaluate how appropriate those funds are for the proposal. And again, if you run into any questions while preparing your budget, please email our Assistant Director, Rose Madsen, at sgbudget@ucsd.edu. Okay, so the final components are the letters and transcripts. Applicants need to obtain letters of support from their research and community mentors, which should indicate the mentor's willingness to be your mentor, support for the research project, as well as provide a brief description of their plan for mentorship. These letters should each be 2 pages long. or up to 2 pages. Additionally, 3 letters of academic recommendation are required, and those are really supposed to focus specifically on the academic qualifications and performance of the candidate. The research mentor can provide one of these letters, but they should focus really on those academic qualifications and not duplicate material that are in the letter of support. These letters must be requested using EC Grant and directly submitted to EC Grant. This is just for confidentiality reasons. Applicants must also provide transcripts for the undergraduate and graduate institutions, although postdoctoral applicants do not need to submit their undergraduate transcripts. Unofficial transcripts are acceptable, which is great. Okay, so again, our full applications are due on April 20th by 5 p.m. Pacific time. California Sea Grant and the Delta Science Program will assemble review panelists for each of those review tracks to review your submitted full applications. The review panelists will be comprised of external independent expert reviewers from relevant disciplines, the Delta Science Program leadership, and California Sea Grant leadership. Review is going to be based on the selection criteria, which I'll go over on the next slide. And then based on that review, finalists will be recommended for funding. However, the final decisions for which proposals are going to be funded is going to be made by the lead scientist at the Delta Science Program. So the selection criteria is essentially the rubric by which each of these applications is evaluated. So it's very important that as you're preparing your application, you're referring to these selection criteria in order to understand what the reviewers are looking for and the weight or importance of each of these selection criteria. So the first selection criteria is the quality of the research proposal, including the appropriateness of the approach to be used, which is 25%. The next is the strength of academic performance and relevant academic achievement, experience, and the quality of applicants' career goal statement, 20%. The next is the importance of the proposed research, the priority topics identified in Appendix A. And again, the appendix is available on our webpage that Nick has linked in the chat. So please refer to that appendix as you're working on your proposal. The next criteria is the research mentor's demonstrated abilities in the general area of methodology and or questions addressed by the proposal. This is worth 10%. The next is the expected quality and strength of interaction that will be developed between the fellow and their research and community mentors, which is worth 10%. And finally, the degree to which the proposed activity will achieve beneficial, broader, societally relevant impacts. And we have a list there of things which are included as potential impacts that your project could address, and that's worth 10%. The timetable for this application and review process today, right this moment, we are doing the RFA informational webinar. The notice of intent form is due February 28th. The applications then will be due to California Sea Grant via EC Grant on April 20th. We will then go through the review process, and ideally by June, you will have heard whether you have been selected or recommended for funding or not. And the start date for these fellowships would begin approximately in August and September of 2022. And these, again, can be either 1 or 2 year fellowships, depending on what you would like to request for your funding. Okay, so we've made it through the application component section and would like to open it up again for questions related to what we just discussed.
And we got 2 questions. The first one is about application logistics. So are the management needs, personal statement, CV, each their own page limit included in the overall 12-page limit for the project narrative, or are they in addition to those 12 pages?
They are in addition to, so just the that first section itself, the proposed research, that is up to 12 pages, and then the other ones that have their own page limits are separate from that.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll add a typed answer to that. The next question, is there a minimum GPA to apply? And I know you just showed the selection criteria with the evaluation weights, but I don't know if you had any other answer.
There is no minimum GPA to apply.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, can you request a 1.5 year fellowship or does the timeline need to be either 1 or 2 full years?
That is a good question.
I
Nick,
would think 1.5 would be considered. I don't know if we've had that before, but
Nick, is that something that we can
Yes,
do?
that
Oh,
does
Sean
not
is here.
preclude them from applying. If you can finish your project in that less than 2 years, that's fine.
But when they
It's up
propose the
to-
budgets,
It's up to 2 years.
okay. And is the minimum 1 year?
I don't think we've had an instance where something was proposed for under a year.
That would make a lot of sense.
That's it for questions in the Q&A, and I haven't seen any in the chat, so thank you for all the participants for using the Q&A.
Great. Well, we do have just a couple more slides on some application tips and common errors. So if you think of another question, feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll make sure to get to that before we sign off today. All right, so just some application tips that we want to pass down after, again, this is our 13th cohort of Delta Science Fellows, which is really amazing and exciting. So we hope that you'll take these tips to heart. First is to really pay attention to and meet all of the deadlines. We will not be granting any exceptions for those deadlines. Make sure to read all of your application instructions very carefully and ensure that you're answering the questions and meeting the selection criteria. Again, that rubric is how you're going to be evaluated. So if you do not meet the points on the rubric, you probably will not rank very well. A clear and engaging proposals stand out in reviewers' minds. So please make sure that you are accomplishing that, especially in that project summary and introduction. Assume that you're writing for a reviewer in a somewhat related field rather than an expert directly in your area. And again, this just speaks to the approach and the assumptions that you are expecting your reviewer to know about. Make sure that this is engaging for someone who's not exactly researching what you're researching, but maybe is a little bit outside of that. Some of the common errors that have been seen in past rounds of this fellowship application process is that a proposal is too ambitious. It promises too much for too little money and or time. And so please make sure your proposal is realistic. If another error is that there are no testable hypotheses. And by this, essentially, we're asking that you try to make sure that your proposal is not just descriptive. This is generally less favorably received by reviewers. So try to think about what hypotheses you may have in your proposal. Another error is when the proposal is fragmented or disjointed. If it's very obvious that these different parts were written by different people and then pulled together, try to make sure you have a cohesive story throughout your application components. Another error is not enough detail or unclear research methods, or the proposal does not fit with the purpose of the RFA or address the priority topic areas. I think when you read through the RFA itself, and probably what you've heard today in our webinar, is that those science actions and management needs are very critical in these applications. You're asked very explicitly to talk about how your research project is going to address those. So please make sure it's very clear how your proposal is going to fit with those and the RFA itself. All right, another error is that the introduction is too long, or the plan of work and research methods are too short and too vague. If there's inadequate expertise demonstrated within the partnership, and this can be the research mentor, for example, not having experience with methodology. It needs to be very clear what broader impacts the Delta policies and our management are going to be made possible. If another error is when you're not sufficiently describing the role of mentors in providing mentorship and professional development, and then not describing the necessary permits. So we want to remind you that the very critical points of contacts for this opportunity are myself, You can contact me at sgproposal@ucsd.edu. Rose Madsen, if you have questions with any budget related items, can be reached at sgbudget@ucsd.edu. And then Lauren, again, is our point of contact for the Delta Science program and the community mentors specifically. And Lauren's email is there. All of our information about this Delta Science Fellowship is on our website. And we will now, this is all the content that we've prepared for the webinar today. So we'll really open the floor again for any final questions that folks have for us. Yeah.
And Leanne, can I just make some final comments?
Of course.
So in the Delta Science program, we are very excited about the Science Fellows program. It's been one of our most successful programs over the years. And we feel it's such a great honor to be able to support graduate students and postdocs. And we've seen so many graduates of the Fellows program now engaged with the agencies or in academia. And it's really a great springboard for your career. So I strongly encourage you to apply. And in addition to asking me questions about community mentors, feel free to direct questions about the science action agenda priorities, the management needs, the science actions. If you have any questions about those topics and does your project match, please feel free to reach out to me for those questions as well. And now we can take the other questions.
Awesome. Yeah, there's some questions coming in, and I think response to Leon, some of the suggestions you have. So the first question is, somebody's just starting their program in the fall. Is it still recommended if they apply? They only have a general idea of what they'd be doing for their PhD thesis, so their budget and work plan might be a little vague.
I can respond to that. The program is competitive, and I would encourage you to work that through with your research mentor to see if you have sufficient information to be competitive. But it is favorable, I think, to have a pretty good sense of what your project involves in order to meet all those criteria. But that's one of the purposes of your research mentor, is to advise you on that.
Thanks, Lauren. And I guess one potential benefit of even just trying this year is that you will get feedback on your proposal, and perhaps you could apply again in the next cohort with a stronger application. But I don't know if that's encouraged or not.
That's a good idea. And it also gives you experience in what the components are of the fellowship and how to fill it out. So I think that's a great suggestion, Leanne.
Okay, so I see a question from Carly. I will graduate June 2023. If funding goes through August and September for 1 year, am I still eligible? So now that Shauna is here, we did have a question earlier about whether you need to remain a student for the duration of the fellowship opportunity, or if you're still affiliated with the institution, can you still be eligible for these funds? So Shauna, maybe you can help us just clarify that you do need to be actually a student in order to be eligible.
Right. So they would have to wrap up the project with graduation. So in essence, you would not be requesting, right, 12 months or a 1 year funding. So there's nothing precluding that. I don't think we set a minimum that it has to be. So it's how compelling your project is that you can finish by June.
Thanks, Shauna. So that's great news, Carly. You can apply. Okay, so we have a couple more questions about the whether you can apply for this opportunity if you are a non-US citizen. So currently we are saying that if you are a non-US citizen, you are not eligible for this fellowship opportunity. Delta Science program is going to check back with their folks and see if that is the case or not.
And I would also ask Shauna, in the past, how have we treated that, Shauna?
I'll have to look, Lauren. I don't
Okay.
recall. Yeah.
Okay.
This particular fellowship. But I think, Lauren, what's more important is the source of funding and whether your funds allow. So,
Right. Okay. We'll look into it and get back to you.
And then we had someone else ask, are there examples of previous successful applications that we can reference? You can read about our past cohorts on our website. Nick provided that link in the answered questions. I don't think we can provide copies of previous applications just for personal information reasons. But hopefully the examples of past projects can give you an idea of the types of things that have been funded in the past. But again, just keep note that we do have now this expanded emphasis on social science. And so unfortunately that won't be as represented in past applications, but the Delta Science program is very interested, of course, in including that now. So certainly reference those, but be aware that the RFA has changed for this upcoming cohort. All right, do we have any final questions? Well, you have our contact information if you end up having some very specific questions about your project or anything you think of later. We are really appreciative of you taking the time to be here with us today and look forward to hopefully seeing some of your notice of intents to submit and full applications later on. And I want to thank the Delta Science program folks for being here with us today. And we're excited for this new cohort.
Yes.